Hello again, Buckeye Nation. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, this week we are breaking down Ohio State versus Nebraska, coming off of the open date the previous week and playing like it was an open date the week before that at Purdue. Ohio State gets back in the win column, goes to 8-1 with a win over Nebraska. It was at times not very convincing. We were a little worried about Nebraska being able to do a lot of the same things that Purdue does offensively, and they were able to do a lot of that. But, I think that we did see some improvement in some areas, so I don't think it's all bad. The problem is where we are in the season. Is it enough to build on to get to the level where Ohio State needs to be going into two road games before Michigan? And we don't really have to come up with the answer for that today, but why don't we just start by just share your overall thoughts on the 36-31 win over Nebraska, which kind of looked a little better for Nebraska at the end because they did score last with under 3 minutes to play. But what were your thoughts overall on the day? Just some high level stuff.
Well, high level, obviously that a win is certainly better than a loss. The last time Ohio State took the field, the fact that that they were so thoroughly outclassed by Purdue had a collective bad feeling amongst the fans, the coaches, the players. So everyone was kind of anxious to see, okay, what's Ohio State going to do against Nebraska? I think on the podcast last week, I had some apprehension about the fact that it was a noon kickoff. It seemed as though Ohio State was playing rather uninspired throughout the first half. That they seemed to kind of pick it up in the second half. So a win is certainly better than a loss, but I agree with you that, yes, there are some positives to take away from this win against Nebraska, but there are enough things that are concerning going into a game at Michigan State, a game at Maryland, and the game at the end of the month to make you feel completely confident that Ohio State has solved all of the problems that have been plaguing them all season.
Yeah, the Cornhuskers came down the field, had a nice long drive, 5 minutes, 12 plays, 75 yards, opened the scoring with Devine Ozigbo with a 1-yard touchdown run, and you immediately started to think, here we go again. But it really wasn't that, because Ohio State did at least make Nebraska take a lot of plays to get down the field, and instead of giving up a lot of big plays or a few big plays along the way, and that was a little bit different. Ohio State was a little slow getting started. We've seen Ohio State have trouble coming off of bye weeks with much emotion, and as I would imagine they worked really hard on the in the 2 weeks since the Purdue game, maybe a little harder than they normally do. Coming back from a bye week in terms of, the coaches getting after them and trying to install some things and get some things changed and make the changes necessary to get the team where it needs to be for the stretch run. And as you mentioned, it's not there yet. Ohio State was a little slow coming out. Of course, gave up the touchdown drive. Decided we're going to come out, we're going to run the football, and then went 4 and out, failing on a fourth down play. So that wasn't ideal. But Ohio State did get some stops in the first half on defense. They were able to pin Nebraska deep with a nice punt from Drew Chrisman. And Ohio State got a little momentum midway through the first quarter with a Keandre Jones block punt that, of course, went out for a safety rather than just setting up nicely for somebody to jump on for a touchdown.
Well, I'm happy for Keandre Jones because he's one of those players on the defensive side of the ball who was heavily recruited. I seem to recall Urban Meyer saying when Keandre Jones signed with Ohio State that this is the type of young man who's going to be a captain at Ohio State by the time his playing career is done. And I'm not taking anything away from Pete Werner because Pete Werner won the starting job. Keandre Jones has played well whenever given the opportunity. It just seems as though Keandre Jones beyond just special teams, he's one of those guys that when I think back at the end of the 2018 season, I'm going to be wondering if Keandre Jones should have been playing more than he did in 2018, because that block punt that did lead to a safety certainly seemed to kind of give a little bit of life to what seemed to be a listless Ohio State squad up until that point.
Yeah, and hold on to that theme of maybe guys who should have been playing more than they did, because we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Of course, Nebraska was a bit of a mess on special teams. They tried an onside kick. It looked like some people just said that the kicker stumbled. It definitely looked to me like an attempted onside kick after the touchdown, but it went horribly wrong. And Ohio State got great field position. Not that the Buckeyes were able to do anything with that, failing on the fourth down attempt. But and then the block punt, and you know what bothered me throughout the day? I didn't really mention this in the Grumpy Old Buckeye. Maybe this is a Grumpy Old Buckeye extra just for you Silver Bullets podcast listeners. But the thing that I kept seeing on Twitter, and the thing I kept hearing during the broadcast was, if not for Nebraska special teams problems, this game would be a lot different. Okay. Well, the last time I checked, special teams was a big part of a football game. You've got offense, you've got defense, you've got special teams. You've got three phases of the game. So what you're basically saying is, if not for this entire phase of the football game, this would be a lot different. And I would just counter that with, well, if not for Ohio State having to ever play defense, it could also be a much different game the other direction.
Yeah, I want to give credit to Scott Frost for coming out. Now, you're absolutely correct. It was a botched onside kick. Make no mistake about that. But I give credit to Scott Frost coming in with the mindset of, all right, we're gonna play to win this game no matter what. We're gonna take our chances. Obviously, they had seen some things on film that led them to believe that the onside kick was something that they could execute and capitalize upon. Fortunately for Ohio State, it didn't work out. And as we've been talking about with the special teams, the blocked punt, giving credit to Keandre Jones coming in. Granted, he was unblocked, but the fact that Ohio State was aggressive at that point and came in and succeeded on the block, that was, as I said a few moments ago, I think it kind of helped to give a good spark to Ohio State when they needed it.
Yeah, I lamented a little bit about it being a safety rather than a touchdown, but the good thing is, after safety, you get the ball right back, and Ohio State was able to capitalize and make it a 9-point mistake for Nebraska by Dwayne Haskins throwing a 42-yard touchdown pass to Johnny Dixon, who was pretty wide open on the play.
Yes, he was. It kind of almost reminded me of earlier in the season when Paris Campbell was left completely unaccounted for, and I realized a completely different looking pass pattern and different players altogether, but it did remind me. It's like, okay, I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad Dwayne Haskins capitalized upon it.
So Ohio State took its first lead of the game, goes up 9-7, and then Ohio State, again, before the end of the quarter, got another one, made it 16-7 on a J.K. Dobbins 10-yard run. Good day for Dobbins.
Very good day for Dobbins, and it also helped that Ohio State was finally able to break their red zone, I don't want to say curse, but the fact that they were able to get that, while running on the ground within the red zone, that kind of was, I think, a sign of good times, at least against Nebraska. They weren't out of the woods by any stretch, but it was nice to see Ohio State, as you and I have been calling for, a greater commitment to running the ball, that was the first sign that Ohio State was going to be effective at running the ball.
Yeah, I was happy to see they went with sort of almost like a jumbo pistol look, and had extra tight ends in. They brought in Wyatt Davis in a tight ends number, not Robert Landers as we'd hoped, but still pretty good job to throw in an extra offensive lineman in a tight end number, and they were able to just bully their way into the end zone in the red zone, which is something that they have not been able to do of late.
Yeah, I don't care what jersey number that they wear, and I don't care who the players are. I mean, obviously, I do care. I would love to see Robert Landers get the credit where he is so richly deserving. But in all sincerity, Wyatt Davis fulfilled Urban Meyer's pledge that he was going to play. Granted, he didn't line up on the offensive line in the capacity that I think most Ohio State fans were suspecting, but I really don't care. The fact that he was in as that extra tight end that Ohio State was able to hand the ball off to J.K. Dobbins and come up with a touchdown was certainly fine by me.
Absolutely. So, you get out of the first quarter, and things looked pretty good at that point because Ohio State had gotten some stops on defense. They were able to take a lead and made it, kind of took a little bit of an early control of the game. But then Nebraska came back in the second quarter with a pair of touchdowns, both short runs by Adrian Martinez, and Nebraska was able to take a lead by halftime. And I wasn't panicking at this point because I had seen some semblance of life out of the defense. They had gotten some stops. They were getting some pressure. They were getting into the backfield. They were getting some tackles for loss. But, of course, the big loss of the first half was Jordan Fuller. He just, he tries to get low to stop a tight end over the middle, and that tight end not only drops the ball but then stumbles into Fuller, and they call it the dreaded targeting comes out, and then they review it, and they don't say that it stands. They confirm targeting. What was your take on that play?
Well, I'm just not at all understanding as to how that play is targeting. And then, a few plays later, Johnny Dixon was on the receiving end of something that certainly seemed to me to be comparable, if not worse, and wasn't called. So I've advocated for this before. Nothing has made me change my mind on this, is that I believe that if targeting is going to be called, I believe it should be more kind of along the lines of the soccer methodology of a yellow card type penalty, and then that way the player is kind of on alert for trying to alter their behavior. I just think I've seen so many inconsistencies. The Ohio State fan in me is going to come out in this capacity. It seems like Ohio State gets called for targeting and their opponents do not. Mm-hmm. And I've seen on a national scale some egregious looking events where it seemed as though that's where targeting should have been called and it wasn't. So the reason why I'm just kind of giving you a very vague answer is because I have a vague understanding as to what targeting is based on the results that we have seen over the past couple of years.
You're not alone. It's not just you. It's every human being. Apparently, we're talking replay officials. We're talking referees on the field. We're talking, fans, players, coaches. Nobody knows what targeting is, and that's the biggest problem with this rule, Chip. It's just, you mentioned watching other games. I've seen plays in the Pac-12 because I watch a lot of the Pac-12 after dark because it's some of the most entertaining football there is, and I've seen at least 5 plays this year where you could press charges against the player and he doesn't get thrown out of the game. And yet you lose a Jordan Fuller for a play that he's clearly not leading with the crown of his helmet. He's clearly not launching. The only criteria that it meets is forcible contact to the head, but it's not with his helmet. He's getting low to try to make a tackle. He gets the unfortunate circumstance of the tight end stumbling and coming down to his level to where his head can be hit. But in normal situation, you're a safety. You've got a tight end coming over the middle. If he makes that catch, he's a much larger human being than you. The only way to get him down is to get low and try to take him out with a form tackle from getting down. And that's what he did. He tried to get down low, and it's not his fault that the helmet came down to his level.
I agree. And I think if there's one saving grace to the ejection of Jordan Fuller was that it was still in the second quarter, meaning that now granted, Ohio State certainly could have used him for the remainder of the game against Nebraska. I'm not trying to suggest that Ohio State was fine without Jordan Fuller, but if there was a saving grace, it was that it took place during the first half, meaning that Jordan Fuller will be eligible to play from the onset of the game up in East Lansing against Michigan State on Saturday.
Yeah, that's excellent. So the Buckeyes come out in the second half. The third quarter belongs to the Buckeyes. A couple of touchdowns. One, a J.K. Dobbins 3-yard run. Again, nice to see him running in the red zone and scoring. Paris Campbell scored on a 9-yard pass on a play that it looked like it kind of wasn't going to go anywhere, and then all of a sudden Paris Campbell scored it out through the blockers and got into the end zone. So Ohio State, after 3 quarters, up 30-21, sort of righted the ship. And, Nebraska came back, kicked a field goal. Ohio State responded with a touchdown late to take a 36-24 lead on a 42-yard J.K. Dobbins run. They went for 2, and it failed. It failed miserably. I don't know what. I think it was a pass play where Dwayne Haskins just decided to run, but it was pretty ugly. And then Nebraska answered with a touchdown to J.D. Spielman, who was, for some reason, lined up against Pete Werner, a linebacker, which is a mismatch. 365 days a year, Chip. And also, Pete Werner was picked on the play. So it was not only a mismatch, but he had no chance because he was picked and it wasn't called. So 36-31 at that point, nothing doing with Nebraska. They weren't able to threaten further, and Ohio State wins at 36-31. J.D. Spielman, by the way, after a year after going for 200 yards, they did a pretty good job on him overall. When he wasn't on a linebacker, they handled him pretty well. 6 catches for 61 yards.
They did, and I think Ohio State fans also have to be kind of breathing many sighs of relief because there were a few occasions where Nebraska had wide receivers wide open, such as J.D. Spielman, that they developed either alligator arms and or just poor concentration or a combination of both, where it could have been big plays that might have resulted in touchdowns, passes dropped. So, yes, I think Ohio State, they were able to do a pretty good job on J.D. Spielman, but Nebraska contributed a lot to just the poor results for the Cornhuskers on the field. There were we talked about Adrian Martinez earlier. He showed a lot of potential for greatness as a true freshman. Mm-hmm. As you said, he had the touchdowns. He also had for let's just say freshmanitis. Just kind of the pass that was. It was to J.D. Spielman, as a matter of fact, but it was behind the line of scrimmage, resulted in a Nebraska turnover. Any other time, I'm sure, Scott Frost was probably not so much angry as much as just kind of, okay, that was the wrong execution of the right idea. The idea that, all right, we're gonna run this, and I think Adrian Martinez was so fully committed to running the play without realizing, okay, we're in such close field, in such optimal field position that we don't want to take points off the board, which is precisely what happened mm-hmm. by continuing with the play. So I think Nebraska, I agree with Urban Meyer wholeheartedly when he says that for a 2-win team, they are definitely going to be a lot to handle in the coming years. Just for future reference, looking up the 2019 schedule, Ohio State is at Nebraska on September 28th next season. And I'm not much of a gambling man, but I'd be willing to bet that that's going to be a night game for the Buckeyes. I think Nebraska, regardless of what they do the rest of this season, I think Nebraska is certainly poised to improve dramatically under Scott Frost. I think Adrian Martinez is certainly a player to build upon, and I only can surmise that Scott Frost is doing a lot of good things on the recruiting trail, getting the kind of players into the program that he wants to build the Cornhuskers up with in a similar fashion to what he played with at Lincoln when he was the quarterback, 20 years ago.
Yeah, Scott Frost has got that team headed in the right direction. One of my favorite things to see on Twitter, and I say this sarcastically, it's not one of my favorite things, is, against Purdue. Oh, this team lost to Eastern Michigan. Against Nebraska. Oh, this team lost to so-and-so. It doesn't matter what team. There's no transitive property. If this team lost to that team, it's because on that day they weren't as good. This Nebraska team is not the same Nebraska team that started the season. This is a very good Nebraska offense. Defensively, they still have a lot of problems. But offensively, they can hang with just about anybody right now because they do have a good quarterback. He can run, he can throw. They're kind of missing a home run running back, but I think that they'll probably get one of those in the recruiting over the next year or two. I think they're going to address that. I thought their offensive line played pretty well, actually. So and they have as good a receivers as anybody in the Big Ten. So
right, and JD Spielman will be around at least one more year. So you have to figure because Stanley Morgan, I believe, is out of eligibility. I'm fairly certain. So they definitely have some building blocks. Mm-hmm. I think I agree with you. I think the offensive line played fairly well. The defense certainly needs work, but they were as I said a few moments ago, I think they came into this with the right mindset for a 2-6 team. They did not come in here playing with their heads hanging low and thinking, woe is me, we're going to get killed. Like they came out and they pretty much, in terms of we were just talking about the attempted trick play. Mm-hmm. We talked about the onside kick. They came playing to win.
They were aggressive.
Yes. So I always think, that's the kind of thing. If like you never like to lose, but that's the kind of game that if you're a Nebraska fan, you can walk away kind of feeling we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree with you. So the running game definitely much better. Granted, the defense not a top 10 defense by any stretch of the imagination. But J.K. Dobbins 23 carries, 163 yards. That's a much more J.K. Dobbins-like effort than what we've seen. Mike Weber had 9 carries for 91 yards, averaged 10 yards a carry. Could have easily have gone over 100. They stopped giving him the ball with about 5 or 6 minutes left to go in the game. He had a couple of fumbles in the game, one that went out of bounds and another one that I'm not sure would have been ruled. I think he would have been ruled down had they looked at it again. But I think there was maybe a penalty or something on the play. It got wiped out or anyway or something. But couple miscues for Weber, and he did not grade out as a champion. One of the things that didn't go well during the game was a big sack and fumble by Dwayne Haskins, a guy coming off the edge, and nobody to block him. Mike Weber was the running back in that situation, did not pick up the blitzer, and he double teamed with Isaiah Prince. And I think Urban said this week that that was supposed to be the tight end's job. The tight end in this case was Rashad Berry. He went out for a pass. So I don't know if that's just a communication issue or if Rashad Berry didn't get the right information for the play or if that's or something else. I don't know. But whatever the reason is, it was a bad look, and obviously it was a turnover, and it helped Nebraska climb back in the game.
And Haskins, I agreed with something you tweeted out during the game. It certainly seemed as though Haskins was off after that hit.
Yeah.
And that's not an indictment on Dwayne Haskins because he took a shot, right to his throwing arm. So it made me wonder, are we going to see Tate Martell? Obviously we didn't, but if anything, I also agree with other people who have written online that this was, of all the games, this was Dwayne Haskins' worst game statistically. But when you weigh it against the improved running game production, I'll take it. I mean, that is not meant as a slight on Dwayne Haskins,
right.
But I think the fact that Ohio State was – I've said this repeatedly, that there are going to be times where you need to run the ball when you want to, and you need to burn clock. And we haven't talked about that because it seemed like there were some highly questionable strategic decisions by the coaching staff in the second half when you had, thinking, okay, you're going to run the ball. And, later on after the game, my brother-in-law said, yeah, that one series, they burned 16 seconds off the clock because they did 3 straight passes.
Yeah.
You're thinking like that should have been multiple minutes, regardless of whether you had any substantially long runs. That's where who cares? You run the damn ball.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
Absolutely. Haskins has a spoiled Chip because his numbers, 18 of 32, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 252 yards, only was sacked once. If you look back at any other quarterback in Ohio State history, that's a good day.
Yes.
And for Dwayne Haskins, that's like his worst game. So, we're a little bit spoiled by the way that Haskins has played. But, I think when you look at those numbers, it was fine. It wasn't great, but it was fine. And, you mentioned that, he took that shot on that sack and he grabbed at almost like his collarbone area, right? He was grabbing at his, right in front of, a little bit more interior than his right shoulder. And he was grabbing there. And that's never a good look. You never want to see your quarterback grabbing that area. So if he was a little off, and, we saw some passes, I think, especially toward the end of the first half when it was like, I thought there was a bit of clock mismanagement on the defensive side, not using timeouts and preserving a little bit of time, maybe try to get a late score. But, they tried a couple of out routes, and he threw them 5 yards out of bounds. They were not close, and I started to worry, if he was even going to come out to start the second half. But he did, and he got better. It wasn't great, and part of what wasn't great were the 2 series you're talking about. They were back to back. They went 3 straight passes, 3 and out, when they had a 2-score lead, and gave the ball back to Nebraska. And then on the next drive, they threw on first, ran on second, and threw on third. And I believe all of those passes, all 5 of those passes in that 6-play sequence were incomplete passes. So considering the fact that he completed 18 of 32, so he had 14 misses, and 5 of those were on back-to-back drives.
And he had that terrible interception he forced into coverage in the end zone.
Yeah.
For Chris Olave, who was covered, and I think you tweeted out how there were 2 wide receivers. Now, granted, they weren't in the end zone, who were open underneath. So that was, I think you're onto something when you say that we're spoiled. It's almost as though the Dwayne Haskins inexperience that we were expecting to see earlier in the season, that we saw flashes of it against Nebraska when, I don't want to say when they could least afford it, but when you certainly least wanted it. The idea that, all right, you're in the red zone. Let's take care of the ball. So we want a touchdown, but worst case scenario, we're going to wind up with 3 points, and then we wind up with nothing because of a forced pass into the end zone.
Yeah, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't that the first drive of the second half?
Yes.
And so they go right down the field, and you're thinking they're instantly going to be right back in this game. And yeah, there was a guy. I think maybe that's one of those cases where you decide before the snap, I'm going to go to this guy. Maybe because Chris Olave hasn't scored touchdowns, maybe you decide I'm going to go for him. And he was double covered. That was a bad ball, bad decision. 2 guys on him, but he had someone underneath. I think it may have been McLaurin. I can't quite recall with 100% certainty, but I did put it in Grumpy Old Buckeye. He had a guy breaking over the middle who was open, and then he had another guy toward the outside, which also he was open, but it would have been a little bit more difficult throw. So he had 2 other options that were better, and probably both of them net him first downs. And instead, it's a turnover. So, yeah, he made some questionable decisions. He made some bad throws, and you wonder how healthy he was after that hit.
And it was also brought up at the Monday morning press conference, questions about, is everything okay with him when it comes to running? Because there were when he had the opportunity to gain more yards and immediately slid and I think somebody said, "Oh, the slide looked better," but when the opportunity to gain more positive yardage was there and he didn't take it. So I'm sure he's going to be hearing from his teammates as well as the coaches about, what's going on running. I hope that the people online who have suggested that maybe his NFL future is figuring too prominently in his mindset, I hope that they're mistaken. I just don't know how it is. It's going to be one of those mysteries because, as I said at the press conference, it was brought up about how he had that long run against Michigan, and people remember that. And so far this season, they have not seen Dwayne Haskins run with any kind of authority or decisiveness.
I think I don't. Of course, who knows what lurks in the hearts of men? I mean,
That's right.
Other than the shadow knows, but nobody else knows. I don't think that it's that. I mean, the surest way to get hurt is to play not to get hurt. And it's a long season. I mean, it makes sense to do the things that you should do that are smart. Run out of bounds when contacts come and get down and slide. But he did have that one play where it looked like he could have got 4 to 6 yards easily before the defender closed, and instead, he ran for about 1.5 yards and then did his, baby giraffe crashing into a wall routine of a slide, and it wasn't good, and he could have done better, and he's taken a lot of grief for it, but you're right. I mean, everybody remembers that Michigan run, and I think a lot of it's just confidence. I don't think he's running the ball with confidence and with purpose. I think he's running almost out of protest, like I there's nothing else I can do, so I have to run, rather than just embracing it and saying, let me go get the yards that are there. I just think there's a lack of confidence in his own ability to run for yards. I think he's in his own head.
You're probably right though, because he knows he's not JT. He's certainly not even in the same neighborhood as Braxton Miller. And when you think about the quarterbacks like Ohio State has had, I mean, Cardale Jones in comparison to Dwayne Haskins, yes, they're both more of the pocket passer variety, but let's face it, Cardale Jones, in terms of the physical size that he possesses versus Dwayne Haskins. Not that Dwayne Haskins is, like he's 6'3", but Cardale Jones certainly had a lot more in terms of just size than Dwayne Haskins. And when you think of him running over people from Alabama, running over defensive linemen from Oregon, like you said, it might be in Dwayne Haskins' head, like, okay, I'm going to be the worst for the wear on this one if I lower my shoulder, and maybe it is in his head, like, I don't want to injure my throwing shoulder. So
yeah,
we can only hope that he, when and if the opportunity presents itself for positive yardage, that he does better than he has so far this season. But I'm not going to hold my breath any longer, because I think at this stage of the season, what you see is what you get with Dwayne Haskins whenever he decides to run the ball.
Before we close the book on Dwayne Haskins, Chip, I do want to point out that, we talked about those 5 passes in a row were among the 14 incomplete passes. 5 of them were right there in a two-series stretch where they should have been running the football and had been effective doing it on the day. So it was really poor play calling by the combination of Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day, whoever is ultimately responsible for deciding we're going to throw the ball here. It wasn't the proper time to throw the ball. It was the proper time to grind it out. You're ahead. You've got a comfortable lead. It's not a big lead, but it's a comfortable lead. You've been able to run the football. Give the ball to Dobbins. Give the ball to Weber. Go. I think that mostly those 2 series are the reason that Mike Weber did not get his 100 yards, and I thought that he deserved it. He had some really nice runs. He had a 37-yarder. He had a good day. I mean, anytime you average 10 yards a carry, you're having a good day. Neither Dobbins or Weber had a negative run. So, good day for the running game. And the Haskins, just to put the bow on that, like I had mentioned, is that some of those were drops as well. I mean, you had Benjamin Victor with a drop. I can recall Demario McCall had a drop. Terry McLaurin had a drop. And I'm not counting the one where he was where the pass interference should have been called and wasn't, when I think it was Boodle hit him just before the ball arrived, and it was just enough to throw him off to where the ball didn't hit his hand but hit his shoulder instead. But there were at least 3 or 4 drops. KJ Hill wasn't right on this day. I mean, KJ Hill had some questionable plays in that game, catching the ball, and I thought that he probably had one of his worst games of the season as well. So the passing game altogether was a little discombobulated.
And we've noticed that Ohio State, when it comes to a noon kickoff, you can say what you want about, it was a blackout game, but they weren't really, like it didn't seem like it, considering it was a noon kickoff. This team comes out sluggish at noon. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it was, just like you said, just kind of the lingering malaise of the Purdue loss on October 20th. I'm only glad that kind of what you've been advocating, and I've been agreeing with you, is that the commitment to the running game was strong from the onset of the game, and it paid off handsomely near the end of the game when you needed it to. That last touchdown by J.K. Dobbins was evidence of that. And then when Nebraska closed to make it 36-31 and Ohio State needed to run the ball to burn the clock, they did it. They were able to do it even though Nebraska knew it was coming. So there's certainly things that are concerning on the defensive side of the ball. But the fact that Ohio State was able to run the ball with J.K. Dobbins, with Mike Weber, and even with some off days by the wide receivers that you mentioned, with Dwayne Haskins not having his typical superb day, that Ohio State was able to come out on top.
Yeah, the thing that I have always come back to is that with an offensive line this size and the way that Dobbins and Weber, while not big guys, they run physically typically. Now they've taken some grief this year for not running as physically as they should be, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I think they ran more physically this week. And over the course of a 60-minute game, that wears an opponent down, especially an opponent that's not as deep as Ohio State is. And it is something that if you stick with it and commit to it, again, we've seen it time and time again. A 3-yard run in the first quarter becomes an 8-yard run. We saw the biggest run plays of the year in this game for Dobbins and Weber because they stuck to it and they were able to break a few because the cumulative effect of that running game is something that you just can't understate. You don't get that when you throw the ball 70 times in a game. It was good to see it. Will it go away next week against the nation's #1 rush defense? We'll see. By the way, another noon kickoff, Chip.
I know. That's one of the things that has me very uneasy about it. It's already the fact that even after, let's just face it, even before it was announced as a noon kickoff, I've had a lot of apprehension about this game from the end of last year when Ohio State blasted Michigan State 48-3 because, big surprise, Mark D'Antonio, that was one of the very first things that he mentioned after Michigan State beat Maryland, that, Ohio State, took it to us last year, or however he phrased it on BTN, and it's on, it's one of these things that full well that he is, stoking the psychological fire of his players that were on the team last year on the receiving end of that, blistering their pride, let alone the fact that Michigan State, as you correctly noted, has the nation's top rushing defense. So Ohio State, I think this is going to be a knockdown, drag out battle for 60 minutes. But this is, as we keep talking about the importance of games in November, if you want to win the Big Ten, This is the kind of game that you have to be able to go on the road into a hostile environment against a quality opponent and come out victorious.
Absolutely. Mark D'Antonio really whips those Ohio boys into a frenzy and gets them excited to play their home state team, many of which kind of had aspirations of being Buckeyes and ended up in East Lansing instead. We'll talk a little bit more about that game in a bit. I do want to, before we leave this game against Nebraska, talk a little bit about the Jordan Fuller ejection, because one of the benefits of the Jordan Fuller ejection is that we got to see Brendan White play a game, and all he did was come in, not even playing a full game, and led the team in tackles with 13. He had 8 solos, also led the team there. He had 2 tackles for loss, read the plays very, very well, especially tunnel screens and things like that. He was able to diagnose them quickly, get up the field, and make a sure tackle. He was a revelation, and everybody was abuzz on social media talking about Brendan White and the fact that he is a legacy player, the son of a very good former Buckeye safety. Is just it makes you wonder. I mean, everybody's asking the same question: where has he been? Why hasn't he been playing, Chip? And maybe the answer to that question is Urban Meyer was suspended during preseason training camp and didn't get to see enough of this kid.
That's a possibility. I mean, just what I remember of Brendan White when he was recruited is that even in terms of like with the official, I guess you would say, press release for the 2017 recruiting class, is that he was listed as an athlete. And when he originally came in, he was a linebacker at first, and then he was moved over to, I believe it was to safety, and then he was moved to wide receiver and then back to safety. And so he contributed last year on special teams, but it was one of these things where I think I'm not disputing that Urban Meyer not being around in the summer had an influence on it. I just think the fact that he was continually being moved. Now I have no idea if these moves were also occurring this training camp. But I think that kind of slows down the development, if you will. Like if you can't ever truly become a master of this one position, we're going to try you over here. Okay. And then, you never really master it and you move somewhere else. I will say this is the question that's kind of in the back of my mind is regardless of whether Urban Meyer being there or not being there impacted is I'm wondering, I'm more skeptical and questioning of the Ohio State defensive coaching staff because as we saw earlier in the year, Jocelyn Wint was playing, Isaiah Pryor was playing, and it made you wonder, all right, well, if Brendan White, if that's the kind of performance he could give coming in, how is, what was it that they were missing? And the scuttlebutt is that supposedly, I think Urban Meyer said that it was the last couple of weeks of practice that Brendan White really turned it on and really caught the eye of the coaches. But even so, I am struggling to figure out how Brendan White could have had a performance like he did on Saturday and not have shown any kind of flashes or glimpses of something like that during training camp or during practice when it was evident that the other safeties who were getting playing time were struggling.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder. You mentioned he's been moved around a bit. Maybe just having a permanent home at safety for, several weeks may have been what he needed to start turning that corner and making those plays. And I have no doubt that he's probably flashed more in recent weeks than he did earlier in the season. But I forget who it was. I believe it was one of the starters, though, that was asked about him. And he said, and I think maybe it was actually it might even have been an offensive player, but it was somebody that was asked this week, and he said that, Urban wasn't in camp for a few weeks and didn't get to see a lot of the plays that White did make. So to your point, yes, the defensive coaching staff should be taken to task for not recognizing if that was indeed the case. Maybe it's just, maybe it's just a kid in front of a microphone saying something. You never can really put too much stock in it. But, at the same time, I think that A lot of people around Buckeye Nation have these questions. Why are other players not playing when the guys that are out there are clearly not getting the job done? And I think your number one answer has to be when your head coach isn't there during training camp, it's going to affect things. And I think in this case, there's probably a bit of truth to that. That missing 3 weeks of the most important time of building your team for the season is going to have an effect, and that's the kind of effect that it can have, because once you make your depth chart and you start playing games, like the coaches say every week, we're practicing to get ready for Nebraska, we're practicing to get ready for Michigan State, we're practicing to get ready for Maryland. That's all you have time to do that week. You don't have time to run those drills and to put to make those evaluations. Those evaluations need to be made before the season starts. And then the other thing that a lot of people like to say, well, some people don't practice well and they're gamers, but I always poo-poo that, because no coach is going to put a player on the field that he doesn't think is has the best opportunity to give himself a chance to win. I think they're always going to put the players on the field that they think give the team the best chance to win. And if you're not showing that in practice, it doesn't matter if you're a gamer, because you're not going to get in the game.
I certainly hope, because Urban Meyer was non-committal about the fact that people are trying to ask is if Brendan White has earned a starting job based on his performance. I certainly hope that if he's not the starter, that he plays significantly within a rotation at safety, simply because Isaiah Pryor, he missed last week due to injury, and Urban Meyer stated that Isaiah Pryor will be healthy, ready to go against Michigan State. Same should be for Jeffrey Okudah, that he'll be back. We already talked about the idea of Jordan Fuller coming off the 1-game suspension for the ejection. That they have Damon Arnett coming back. They have Kendall Sheffield. Now they're going into an opponent with Michigan State that is not nearly as dynamic offensively as their previous opponents were with Purdue and with Nebraska. But I think the performance that Brendan White had on the field, the 13 tackles, the roaming the field, coming up big, making crucial stops and tackles, I think it certainly lends itself to the idea that I've read online of giving Brendan White the starting job opposite of Jordan Fuller, moving Shaun Wade back to his more natural position of cornerback as the nickel corner, and seeing what kind of transpires there. So hopefully Brendan White is not resting on his laurels of being named a champion and having such a tremendous game that was so unexpected. Like you said, if the coaches if they're looking for practice performance, hopefully this is the kind of thing that Brendan White is seizing the opportunity and possibly will be rewarded with a start. And conversely, if you're Isaiah Pryor, who is a highly recruited individual himself, that maybe this will be the kind of spark that will get Isaiah Pryor playing better than he has in the previous games.
Absolutely. Competition is the thing that elevates everybody. I mean, that is why, Alabama's great every year, because the competition level just to get playing time is so high. And I think that it should be that way at Ohio State. And it usually is that way at Ohio State. I think we're seeing some of the effects of, and, more informed people than I have written about this on our site and others, about the 2015 class, and now it's 2018, and those are the guys you expect to be taken over by now, but guys have gone on to the NFL, guys have transferred out of the program, guys have gotten left the game because of medical problems and had to retire, and the guys that have been left have not necessarily been among the top guys from that class. So there's every now and then you get a class like that it kind of, for whatever reason, it just blows up in various ways. And some of the good ways obviously are guys going to the NFL, and some of the bad ways are you know, not developing or transferring out and that kind of thing, and it leaves you with a little bit of a hole. And this class, or this Buckeye team, is probably as a result of that missing that key competition in certain position groups. We've talked about the offensive line before, and how one class basically completely blew up, but it happens all over the team. And I think in the safety room, now that Brendan White has shown in a game what he can do, guys like Jocelyn Wint and Isaiah Pryor have to raise their level, and if they don't, they're not going to be on the field. And so I think that this can only be a good thing for Ohio State.
Oh, when it comes to competition, it's something that Urban Meyer preaches, but we haven't seen a lot of. Urban Meyer also kind of alluded to this, the fact that the team has not had a lot of, I don't want to say blowout wins, but let's just say easier than expected wins, which usually is when you see the younger talent getting an opportunity to come in and perform. A case in point, it's been several games, but I realize completely different position. We talked about running back, Master Teague and Brian Sneed. And I know that there are extenuating circumstances as they relate to Brian Sneed, who's on a suspension that hasn't truly been clarified. But the point being is that it's without those big leads, because Ohio State really hasn't had that since the Tulane game. Let's face it. I mean, they just really haven't. You haven't seen a lot of those sophomores. You haven't seen a lot of those redshirt freshmen. You haven't seen a lot of the true freshmen playing. So it just kind of makes you wonder if the quality is truly there as it relates to this team.
Yeah, we've talked about it too in the past. The old Jim Tressel method of, you know what, the third or fourth series, I'm going to put my backup offensive line in. Just everybody's a backup. They all go out together. They all play. It's like sacrificing a series almost in some ways, obviously unless they do well. But on the other hand, you get guys actual game snaps no matter what the outcome of the game is, no matter what the the second half situation is, whether you have a one touchdown lead or down 3 points or you're ahead by 5 touchdowns, it doesn't matter. You've at least got those guys competitive snaps against first team players. And sometimes I think coaches overthink things. You go out, you get a top 5 recruiting class, put the kids on the field. If they give up a play, they give up a play, but they're learning when they're doing that too. So it makes them better overall. It shouldn't just be get on the field in a blowout where there's no pressure. I think that they say pressure makes diamonds, right?
Yes.
So anyway, it's going to be good to see if Brendan White can keep this up and continue to get playing time, because now he's not a secret. Everybody's seen what he can do, and the coaching staff included in that. So even if he wasn't showing maybe on a day-to-day basis in practice that he deserved to be out there, he's now shown it in a game, a very competitive game against a very good offense, and in fact has outperformed some of the guys that were playing ahead of him. And that's good for Brendan White, and it's good for the Buckeyes. So we will see how that unfolds. Chip, let's turn our attention to Sparty, Ohio State at Michigan State at noon on Saturday. Michigan State is a team that they don't have a great offense. Their scoring offense is only 111th in the country. They average 23.4 points per game. Their total offense is 106th in the country, 360 yards a game. Their rushing game has been dreadful, 112th in the country, averaging 125.6 yards per game. And their passing game, 65th in the country, 234.8 yards per game. Defensively is where they make their money. They are very good defensively. You mentioned, and I mentioned, first in the country rush defense, only 71.7 yards per game allowed. That's a strength against an Ohio State weakness this year. On the passing side, not as good, 98th, 253.4 yards per game, but any team with a very, very good rushing defense is going to see the other team passing a lot more often, and it's going to artificially inflate the passing numbers against because of that. And so you've got a total defense that's 22nd in the country. That's pretty good. 325 yards a game allowed. Scoring defense is quite good, 16th in the country. They only allow 19 points a game. They're going to be at home. They're going to be jacked up. They're going to be remembering getting beat down last week. They're going to have Ohio State at noon in probably a much more hostile atmosphere than what Ohio State fans provided Nebraska on this past Saturday. How do you see this one playing out?
I think this is going to be a slugfest. To use Urban Meyer, one of his favorite cliches is, two sledgehammers, just bashing on each other, hitting on each other. I think it's going to be the type of thing you talked about Michigan State's defense, and you also referenced Jim Tressel. There's a Tressel on Michigan State's defense, and that's Mike Tressel. Jim Tressel's nephew is the defensive coordinator. So a lot of credit to him in terms of helping that defense play, if not necessarily stout against the pass, against the run. It was, while you were enjoying a 70th wedding anniversary party a couple weeks ago, I took the opportunity to watch Michigan State play against Purdue, and Purdue had their challenges going up against this defense, and it wound up to be a 16-13 Michigan State win. I do think when it comes to some of the key players, you rattled off the fact that Mark D'Antonio correctly so on your part does everything he can to motivate the players from the state of Ohio. I may be mistaken in the terms of the total number, so I ask one of our Silver Bullet podcast listeners to correct me if I am mistaken, but I believe that there are 28 players from the great state of Ohio on this Michigan State roster, where you said the idea that a lot of these players, they kind of take it quite personally that Ohio State didn't offer them scholarship. The only minor bit of correction is some of them were offered scholarships and just chose to go play for Michigan State. Maybe they thought that the opportunity for faster playing time was there. A player that I would be very interested to see against Ohio State on the offensive side of the ball for Michigan State is a tight end out of the Cincinnati area by the name of Matt Dotson. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is not to get anyone thinking that the linebackers for Ohio State shouldn't be given some credit for some improvement against Nebraska. But let's face it, we all saw, we talked about Pete Werner being isolated on J.D. Spielman earlier. We also saw Tuff Borland get called, rightfully so, for pass interference against Nebraska trying to cover a tight end. And I'm dreading the idea of Michigan State isolating Matt Dotson on a linebacker, and picking on the linebackers in coverage. I agree with you. I think Michigan State, they're going to try to run the ball because between Brian Lewerke, who may or may not be fully healthy, their backup quarterback, Rocky Lombardi, had a good game against Purdue, but he struggled against Maryland. But they really didn't need a strong passing game against Maryland. They were content running the ball with Connor Hayward, who ran for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think it's going to be a very, very close game. I think it's going to be very physical, and it's going to be the kind of thing where, let's just face it, if a team makes a mistake, I think the other team will capitalize upon it.
Yeah, I think you got to be pretty close on those Ohio numbers. I'm looking at collegefootballstats.com right now, and I counted 26, but it was just a quick count. I could have missed a couple. Looks like they have done very well in North Ridgeville and Lewis Center.
Well, the North Ridgeville boys that you're looking at are probably the Dowell twins.
Yes.
And I may be mistaken.
There are 3 Dowells, actually.
Okay, there are 3. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 who are twin brothers, and I may be mistaken with this, but I believe Ohio State wanted to offer just one of them a scholarship and the other one not. And I think that the brothers kind of had their hearts set on playing at the same college together, and Michigan State did that. And it would be a disservice to them for me to say, oh, they wanted this one and not the other one when I don't accurately recall it. But I'm just going off of what I seem to, in terms of just like, the Twitterverse back in the day when they were coming out of high school. I believe they both played for Lakewood St. Edward, even though that their hometown is listed as North Ridgeville.
Yes, St. Edward, all three Dowells. There's also a couple of Slades from Lewis Center that are both freshmen, so possibly twins there too. I mean,
and do you see a gentleman by the name? Is there is it Connor Lucas on? Is there a fullback from Avon Lake, Ohio?
There is.
Okay, so that young man is from my hometown, and saw him play in high school, and I believe he was a walk-on to Michigan State. But I know Connor Lucas's aunt. She was a secretary at the elementary school where my children previously attended. So certainly wish all of those young men nothing but the best, except, of course, when toe meets leather at noon on Saturday against Ohio State.
Yes. Now, Lewerke has had an up-and-down season. He's got 8 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. Completion percentage about 56%. Rocky Lombardi's at 54%, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, so maybe not throwing the ball closer to the end zone as they would with a junior like Lewerke with the freshman Lombardi. The thing that seems to be happening, Chip, is the running game for Michigan State seems to be working much better with sophomore Connor Hayward than with senior L.J. Scott.
And that's surprising because L.J. Scott, I don't know if it's – there's another Ohio kid for you. And he was one of those guys that I was talking about a few moments ago that had an Ohio State scholarship offer and decided to go play for Michigan State. But it seems as though every time L.J. Scott has an opportunity to play well against Ohio State, he seizes the opportunity. So I'm not sure if L.J. Scott, if he's injured and is not 100%, and that's kind of opened the door for Connor Hayward. But needless to say, I'm certainly hoping that Ohio State does not, kind of get L.J. Scott to, rise to the occasion as he has in his previous opportunities.
Yeah.
When the Buckeyes come to town.
Well, Scott has only appeared in 4 games, so yeah, he must have been dinged for part of the year, but he still only has 15 fewer carries than Connor Hayward, who's played in all 9 games. So clearly, and I thought this in the past. I mean, the Spartans, when they have a good running back that they like, they tend to run him till he dies, pretty much. And I think maybe they've worn L.J. Scott down a little bit. But Connor Hayward has been really lighting it up of late, playing very well. Now they did lose their big receiver for the year, though, right? Felton Davis III is a guy who was basically Mr. Automatic. If it's a third down, they're going to throw the ball to him, and it doesn't matter if you know it; he's going to catch it anyway. He got hurt a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, so they've been hurting offensively in the passing game. I mean, it doesn't help that, as you accurately noted, the quarterbacks have had their issues health-wise, accuracy-wise, but to lose a player like Davis has certainly been a negative impact upon their overall passing game.
Yeah, the tight ends will be a big part of what they do. If you watched the Nebraska game, you saw bits and pieces of this. If you watched Ohio State for the last 10 years, you've seen it a number of times. Anytime a quarterback rolls out one way, Ohio State seems to be just absolutely vulnerable, susceptible, whatever you want to call it, to a throwback the other direction, to a tight end, a running back, a fullback. And I expect to see 3 or 4 of those this weekend.
Well, I think that's an accurate call. Like I said, Matt Dotson, the jersey number escapes me, but I just have a sinking feeling that Matt Dotson is going to be targeted extensively by whoever's playing at quarterback for Michigan State.
Targeting? Is that what you're telling me?
He's going to be the recipient. How about the recipient? How about that?
I don't even. I'm just hearing the word target in my sleep. He's number 89, by the way. If this site is accurate, and it usually is, they're pretty good. So with all of this said, we know that they've got a great rush defense. Their pass defense has been lit up a few times, but again, if you can't run on a team, your only fallback is to pass, and so you're going to pick up yards that way, especially if you're chasing the game. So I look at this pass defense being ranked 98th in the country, and the defense being first in the country in rushing, and I see that the 98th is probably at least in part due to that first in rushing.
I think it's a very accurate assessment. I do. I think that I'm sure you recall it was just a few years ago that Michigan State they were extremely proud of their secondary.
The no-fly zone.
With the no-fly zone,
mm-hmm.
Exactly. When Pat Narduzzi was the defensive coordinator, and I'm not suggesting that they don't have talented players in the secondary, but I certainly believe that if it might be Mike Tressel might have his focus might be more on concentrating on the front seven rather than the back end of the defense.
Yeah, so you've got 3 Spartans with 2 interceptions on the year: David Dowell, Kari Willis, and Matt Morrissey, all defensive backs. You've got a freshman, Shakur Brown, who has 1. You've also got some linebackers with 1. They've intercepted 12 passes this year, 1 for a pick 6. That was Brown. He went 69 yards for a touchdown. This is a defense that swarms to the ball the way that your classic Ohio State defense would swarm to the ball, that we're not seeing this year. But this is a defense that does that.
Don't forget, you're talking about a coaching staff that we've given praise to Jim Tressel. Mark D'Antonio was a prized disciple of Jim Tressel in so many ways, and that 2002 national championship defense, that was architected by Mark D'Antonio.
Yeah.
So, what you see, what we remember of a good Ohio State defense, Mark D'Antonio has simply taken it everywhere he has been as a head coach, most notably up to East Lansing.
Well, they also are very good at tackling you behind the line of scrimmage with defensive lineman Kenny Wilkes and Raekwon Williams. They've combined for 21 tackles for loss. They've got 3 linebackers, all with at least 5.5 tackles for loss. They get into gaps and they stuff you, and I think it's going to be hard for the Buckeyes to run. But again, they can't just sit back there and wing it 70 times, because they also have a pretty good pass rush, and you have to keep them honest. You have to be able to run the football, and you have to stay with it. So I think Ohio State, the Buckeyes need to continue to do what they started against Nebraska, and to improve upon it and to build upon it. I like the fact that we're not seeing as many run-pass options. It's a lot easier and more simple. You and I have talked about simplifying the offense and simplifying things. It's easier for the offensive lineman to know exactly what to do and who to block and where to go to do it, if you know it's a running play or if you know it's a passing play.
And I think I certainly believe against Michigan State, I think the RPOs, if they're not necessarily going to be completely eliminated, I think they're going to be pretty much put on, I don't want to say the back burner, but they might be, let's just say they're going to be kept in the garage fridge, kind of, like the idea, like let's kind of keep this nice and simple. And the offensive linemen like Isaiah Prince, they were very politically correct without taking shots at the coaching staff, but the offensive linemen, their skill set is much better suited to just straight ahead power run blocking. I completely agree with you that I think that the line of scrimmage is going to be a hotly contested affair because of the physical nature of Michigan State's defense. I think yards are going to be tough to come by, but I also agree with you when you say that Ohio State has to have a concerted effort on continuing to run the ball. Granted, they may not hit big yards right at the onset, but by continuing to run the ball in the second half when you need it, that's where you're going to see Ohio State being able to not only get better yardage, but also to control the clock, which is something that I think is going to be a crucial strategy this game against the Spartans.
Absolutely. All right. So, Chip, bottom line it for me. What's your score prediction for Saturday? Who wins? What's the score?
All right. Here's the reason why I'm exhaling is I did some of my research here, and I'm going to throw out some scores here. Okay, in 2012 and in 2016, Ohio State, when they went up to East Lansing, they won both times 17-16. In 2015, and I was at that game, and it was a miserable experience. I think I finally got dry maybe 5 minutes ago from sitting in that. In 2015, Michigan State knocked off Ohio State 17-14. I think this is going to be a game of who can eliminate, or if not completely eliminate mistakes, capitalize upon mistakes. I think Ohio State, I think they're going to try to run the ball. They're going to have their difficulties. I think Dwayne Haskins, I mentioned the idea of Michigan State's tight end Matt Dotson having a big game. I'm going to throw out Luke Farrell, who had some critical receptions against Nebraska. I look for Luke Farrell to be a contributing factor in this game. And I'm going to go Ohio State 20, Michigan State 17.
All right. Do we have a weather report for Saturday in East Lansing?
Cold. That's all I can tell you. No, I say that as a lifelong Ohioan, and I know I'm talking to you. Where as soon as I rattle off the temperature, you're gonna think like it actually gets that cold. I believe the high is supposed to be like 34 during the day. It's supposed to be. I'm not saying snowing, or I think it's just supposed to be a November cold day. If anything, it might be a blessing that it's at noon, rather than, when originally there were concerns about a night game. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine going to a game when it being that cold, but I believe it's supposed to be like 34, 35 degrees in East Lansing.
Wow, an early November chill up in East Lansing, and it'll be interesting to see. Does Dwayne Haskins wear a glove? Does he, how's his grip on the ball going to be in this game? Obviously, he's going to be pressured in this game. It's kind of a scary prospect. This is not going to be an easy one for Ohio State. I'm going to say, though, that Ohio State continues to fix a few things on defense, continues to get better in the run game, get some little bit of confidence from the way the offense played. J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber continue to run hard. I'm going to say Buckeyes 23, Spartans 21.
Very close.
Yeah, I think this is going to be right down to the wire, and I think we may even see some missed field goals come into play in this game.
Okay.
So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. In fact, Blake Haubeil hasn't had a lot of experience. I don't really know what the latest is with Das Boot, but it looks like it's Haubeil's job the rest of the year. And for for the Spartans, I mean, I have no idea if their kicker's good or not. I guess I could look it up.
As long as he doesn't do that. Yeah, as long as he is not coming off the field doing that windmill type thing like I had to see at the tail end of 2015, I'll be happy.
Well, it looks like the Spartans have the advantage here. Matt Coughlin, 12 out of 13. 92% on field goals, all 23 of his extra points. It's a kicker doesn't miss a lot. So Blake Haubeil is going to have to drill some touchdown or drill some field goals, and I think based on my score, I expect It's
Several.
possible. Yeah, it's possible that the Spartans end up with more touchdowns but fewer points based on my prediction. But my prediction is probably not going to be exactly correct. It hasn't been yet this year. So we'll come back and we'll talk about it next week, Chip, and we'll see what transpired. Mark D'Antonio's not going to go quietly after what happened last year. I think you can probably expect something a little tricky, either a fake field goal, a fake punt, a halfback pass, something a little wacky will take place in this game. And the Buckeyes are gonna have to be ready for that. So we'll come back. We'll do it next week. We'll talk about the Spartans. We'll get ready for the Maryland Terrapins as the Buckeyes continue their road trip. And oh my goodness, before you know it, it'll be the game.
Always goes too fast. That's all I can say.
It really does. All right, Chip. Anything else we want to address before we get on out of here?
No. If anyone's going up to East Lansing, drive safe and dress warm.
All right. So, please read our stuff over at theozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon area. I do a weekly column called The Grumpy Old Buckeye, and you write for the site as well, Chip. And we've got other podcasts that fans can listen to, and we have a new name for Across the Field. Apparently, what was that new name?
I think it's called Buckeye Weekly, and I'm still kind of I guess it's that's something that I'm sure that they will convey on their podcast why the name was changed, but. Yeah, Buckeye Weekly. We have the Buckeye Sloopcast. We have the Sons of Schmidt. So we've got a lot of we have you covered pretty much every day of the week for your Ohio State football listening pleasure.
Yes. In fact, that was an SEO thing that people were not able to find across the field when they typed in, Ohio State football podcast. So, Tony Gerdeman made the executive decision, as he is wont to do. To change that, and it's the Buckeye Weekly Podcast, I believe is the name of that now. It used to be Across the Field. Not sure how that feed is working. I'm not sure if it's still if it's all combined on iTunes or whatever. So, but you can, just hit Tony up on Twitter. He'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the way it works is. I think the Sloopcast runs on Monday night, or Mondays, and then we come out on Tuesdays, and then the artist formerly known as Across the Field comes out on Wednesday, and then the Sons of Schmidt on Thursday, and then the Sloopcast returns on Friday. I think that's the schedule. Is that what you think it is as well? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think you are correct.
Okay, great. I would check out the Hayes and Cannon section of the ozone.net just to make sure. And we don't want to steer anybody wrong.
No.
Where else can people find you on the internet, Chip?
On Twitter, I can be found at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And like Michael, I also contribute as a writer to the Hayes and Cannon section on the ozone.net. I also am a contributor for Athlon Sports.
All right. And, of course, you can find me on Twitter as well, at Mike36Fan, and on this very podcast. Please subscribe and leave us some feedback. That'd be great. And give us your honest star rating. Or if you don't feel like being honest, just give us a 5.
Absolutely.
And we'll be back to do it all again next week, Chip. So the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. Yeah, that is officially the name, the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. It's much more Google friendly, Tony says. So there you go. We'll come back. We'll do it again. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.